It's over 100 million adult Americans that are considered outside of the labor force. Now, a good chunk of them are too old to work. Some of them are college students. The problematic cohort that you're talking about is over 10 million-ish or so, which are able-bodied working age adults who are just choosing not to work. So is it surprising that the average customer has seen rampant inflation in everything that they need to buy to exist, but the big employers have seen the least inflation? Those that have control and reap the benefits of corporate profits have been able to enjoy the least inflation in labor costs. Yeah, no, sadly, I'm not surprised by that. This trajectory we're on is unsustainable, right? Because it is creating a wealth divide that is getting to levels where 10 million people are checking out of even the system entirely, right? Who should be contributing to it. We're at record levels of unaffordability for homes, and younger generations not only don't think they're going to be as wealthy as their parents were at similar age, but they've given up on major life milestones like owning a home, owning a car, getting married, having kids, right? That's reflected in the plummeting birth rate in this country.
The U.S. faces deep economic and social challenges driven by inequality, unsustainable policies, and rapid technological change. Addressing these issues requires bold reforms that prioritize fair opportunities, economic growth, and long-term sustainability. National unity and a collective willingness to embrace difficult changes are essential to build a more equitable and resilient future. Without decisive action, the nation risks further division, stagnation, and potential crises.
So that can't continue forever, right? Do you worry at times that we might hit a social boiling over point before we hit the financial boiling over point, where it's really a social revolution or a social crisis versus a financial crisis? I do want to say, look, I'm a huge fan of capitalism, right? So I'm not recommending a socialist agenda here. I do think that what we have right now is much more like corporatism, which is sort of ruling by the corporate elite, right? Which has reinvested its advantage over the decades into financing and funding politicians in DC, who then write the laws and regulations that then increase the advantage for the big corporations. It's hard to name an industry, a corporate industry, that isn't more or less run like a cartel with a few really big companies at the top, and then it's just really hard for anybody to challenge them going forward. We've all seen the revolving door in DC, right, where legislators and regulators, once they're done on DC, they go get a really fat board seat, with the companies that they were overseeing. So there are people who think, look, there's a master plan and there's a very few that have, their spider web that goes out is running the world to their grand plan. I don't really believe that, but I think we kind of end up at the same stage anyways, where we just have players that have gotten an unfair advantage and then they've continued to invest that unfair advantage to gaining even more advantage. And over time, you kind of end up in the same place where you have a few people who control all the assets and all the power, and everybody else is increasingly marginalized. The question is what's going to cause people to rise up and start demanding reform. I'm not saying necessarily Trump is the savior, but what I am saying is very clear is the number one reason why people said they voted the way they did is because they thought the country was on the wrong track. What can be done about inflation? The simple answer to it is, one, we can stop monkeying around with all the things that artificially cause inflation, like the interventions, the trillions in stimulus. So we have to stop all of that. We got to get the Fed and the fiscal side of the house out of deforming the system with all the money and liquidity, the stimulus that they're pumping in there. But the long-term way to deal with inflation is to grow faster than it, right? So is to build an efficient economy that grows real value and American household income faster than the rate of inflation. That's what pulls us all out of this. If we can get to a point where we are doing that and we are truly investing in the engines of American growth and we're sourcing and nurturing that growth here, within our borders, rather than driving growth in another country, maybe even a country that's not even a great fan of America. The great bargain that we struck with China, America's been responsible for China's rise because we were the folks that were sending all the money their way by buying their products, right? So if we can get through all that, I think we're just going to have to be prepared for it, be willing to accept higher prices, sluggish economic growth, some pretty disruptive changes, especially as, maybe some of these big companies, lay off in America, but then slowly get rehired as new, better competitors come into play. The one thing I just want to mention here that's going to be rough, we're going to really have to figure out in this process is, I'm holding up a book here, Jim Rickards' new book, which is basically all about the AI threat. I have long shared this fear too, which is there's a concept that's been well known in economics for well over a century called technological displacement, which says, look, if you can replace human labor with technology that does a better job or even the same job but more efficiently, you should do that. But you have to be careful at the rate at which you displace the human labor, because if you're displacing it faster than you're finding a productive new use for it, you end up creating a social cost that oftentimes is bigger than the efficiencies you gain from the new technology. So, it's really hard to look at things like AI as a potential big job killer. And if you're one of these mega corporations that's heavily investing in AI right now, your hope there is I want as few humans as possible to employ, right? They're expensive, they're litigious. What we're going to need, right, is real disruption, which is essentially what you're asking for here, right? And I think way too early to really tell, but I think this is one of the things that has really appealed to people about Trump's platform that he's put forth. And I will give Trump high marks since winning the election. I don't know if you've been seeing these daily videos that he's been putting out where he's, picking an issue like, free speech or immigration or whatever, and just banging out, okay, these are what my proposals are going to be on day one, right? He's definitely walking the talk right now of translating what he said on the campaign stump to, okay, these are the things I'm going to do in my first, 24 hours of office. And a lot of it, is promising disruption. I think that's what America was looking for. Like I said, disruption comes along with a lot of breaking things, and there's going to be a lot of short-term pain that we're going to have to deal with. And I don't necessarily think we've prepared America for that yet. Do I think it's the right thing? Absolutely. That's the way to bring change to a sclerotic system. It can't be evolutionary. It's got to be revolutionary. You got to do like what Malay's doing down in Argentina, where you're literally taking the chainsaw and just cutting off limbs and saying, look, we'll keep the body stabilized, but we just got to get rid of the gangrene. Apparently, one of the most successful political ads for the Trump campaign was, Harris is for they, them, Trump is for me and you, or something like that. And I think going forward, for the types of changes that you and I are talking about, that the country really needs to embrace and pursue, we need to have a shift of pronouns from it's not about me, it's about us. And I know that sounds kind of socialist, but think of more like the greatest generation pulling together, right? There's important things that we have to get through as a society, right? We need to rise and defend democracy. We need to help each other get through the Great Depression, right? There's a strong sense of we're pulling together a national unity towards a common good and something that's, going to take our energies over time to make happen. That old saying of hard people make good time make weak people make bad times, right? And what happened is the greatest generation laid the foundation. And then we, by the time the boomer generation came along, and not trying to slam your generation too much, it was the me generation, right? It was all about, forget about, the cultural norms and demands, and, it's all about me. And I think that's in many ways become even more self-centered in the digital era. Right. And I think we need to get back to a cultural sense of, what is the greater good for society and what is my role to play in helping make that greater good happen? Because like I said, it's going to take real pain and real sacrifice. There is no magic pill. There's no magic law we can sign that all of a sudden makes everything better tomorrow and we don't have to pay for the hole that we've dug for ourselves. We're going to have to pay the piper. So let's get a leader who can craft a good path. Let's get a populace that elects the right people to support that path and then plays an active role in saying, yeah, I'm going to shoulder whatever my individual burden of this is so that tomorrow I and my future generations can benefit from the sacrifice. I think at the core of everything Trump's talking about is growth, right? I'm going to do things that stimulate growth. And look, growth is good. And the more growth we have, not only can the existing companies pay their employees better, but the more growth we have, the more other companies will spring up and we'll have more competition and we'll have, more positions at more companies for people to apply to, right? On the flip side of that, one of the reasons why people are able to stay on the couch in the basement is because there are assistance programs, government assistance programs that are enabling that. And I think this is going to have to end up being kind of a carrot and stick, right? Where, one of the dangers where we are right now is we've had this cohort that I mentioned, this 10 million sort of plus. A lot of those people have been checked out for a decade or more. Like when you've been out of work that long, not only do you not have a resume of skills to point to get hired, but just kind of your working skills and mindset is atrophied. Are some of these people ever going to be employable again? And I'm not trying to denigrate them. I'm just saying. So we have to, provide more opportunity so that these people can earn a living wage and things like that. But at the same time, we also got to turn up the heat a little bit and say, look, you can't have the never-ending benefit that allows you to be permanently checked out, right? And that's going to be painful. In theory, if you could deport deport 10 million people who you think shouldn't be here and replace them with 10 million people who have not been productive, but are working age and have the ability, and you just do a swap, that would actually be a real net good benefit for the American economy and society. Immigration is essential. If we want to keep our current economic model, it's dependent upon an ever-growing number of people in the 25 to 55 age range, right? And that has been shrinking. So we need to get that headed in the right direction again, and we're not going to do that at current birth replacement rates. There is no shortage of people that want to come into the United States of America. As Elon Musk says, our border is not with Mexico and Canada, it's with the world. I'm personally a big fan of a term I'm hearing more and more of high walls and wide gates. Right? So make it a lot harder for people to get in here illegally, but make it a lot easier for people to get in here legally. And so one of the interesting things about the legal immigration side of things is we're not doing a great job of that right now. And one of the things we're doing a really poor job of is recruiting the skills that our economy needs when we're bringing people in legally. And I think we just need to get much, much, much better at that. I hope that's a big focus of Musk's Department of Government Efficiency and things like that. If we can stop the stream of illegal immigrants, but then get much better at recruiting the talent that we want to have for the type of a future economy we want to have, we turn what right now is a big liability into a gigantic geopolitical advantage for America, right? So I think, with good policy that's then implemented effectively, we can turn something that's been a massive distraction for us into one of the greatest jewels in the American adventure. There is a big wealth transfer that goes on in society to the haves and the have-nots. So there's class division, but there's also a big age division too, which is the economy is largely run for the benefit of older Americans. And the argument for that is first off, we talked about everything that gooses financial asset prices, right? Or asset prices in general. Who owns assets? Well, it's predominantly the older generations. So anything that gooses those assets benefits them way disproportionately. Now, to your point, when you look at government spending, by far, the three biggest expenditures of the government are national security, healthcare, and Social Security. Two of those you only get if you're over 60. It's understandable why the younger generations are feeling increasingly demoralized right now because, they're also being told, hey, you got to shoulder all this. You got to work extra hard compared to generations that came before you. And by the way, you probably may not ever be able to afford a house or maybe able to afford to start a family. When they started Social Security, I think we had like 20 or 30 workers to every retiree. And I think it's now down to something like 2 or 1.5. But the point is if you are the younger generation, right, and you're just starting out in your working career, like you're already shouldering a much larger burden of the people who came before you than previous generations had to. So we add to this like I said, the third of U.S. adults that are considered outside the workforce. So just to be clear for folks, when you hear the unemployment rate, when they tell you it's 4% or whatever, so that is, and again, I'm not denigrating these people, but that's just a tremendous amount of dead weight that is not even being factored into the official calculations, but it's certainly factored into your real life and your real burden of what you have to do to carry this economy forward. I feel this one too. So I've got college-age daughters, one who just graduated college, and I've seen firsthand through them, as well as just through other people I know as well, the personal anguish and frustration of getting out there and trying to get hired in what is being billed as a strong economy, a great jobs market, right? Powell was talking forever about, there's so many more applicants or openings than there are job applicants. Probably more than any other data that's been hard to believe from the government over the past couple of years. The jobs data has been the one that's been the hardest to swallow. And of course, they finally revised the payroll numbers down by like over 800,000 a few months back, right? Just basically admitting we've been way overstating this stuff, right? So it's not a great job market. And if we look at the data, right, the jobs market, the trajectory is weakening. Again, if you look at the official data, very little of it is in code red stages yet, but we're not entirely sure how much we can trust it. But if we look at the trajectory, initial and continuing claims are starting to rise. The employment rate has risen. When you look at the historic chart of the unemployment rate, what it does is after a recession's over, it starts plummeting, and then it comes down, and it forms a base, and it's very, very quiet. And then as soon as it starts increasing, generally, bam, it spikes up and we go straight into the next recession. And so, you have to ask yourself, hey, if the unemployment rate's starting to creep up, what's going to keep it from doing that this time? But my point there is it's hard for a lot of people, especially those with lesser skills, to crack into getting gainful employment right now. Automation, AI is going to make that even harder for folks going forward. But also, if we go into the natural order of things where we go into another recession at some point, that unemployment rate is going to go an awful lot higher. So my point here is as frustrating as it is right now, it may get a lot worse for those people before it gets better.
Adam Taggart discusses the unsustainable economic trajectory in the U.S., marked by wealth inequality, inflation, and a disillusioned younger generation facing unaffordable housing and stalled life milestones. He highlights issues like corporate dominance, government policies favoring the wealthy, and rising technological displacement due to AI. Taggart emphasizes the need for economic growth driven by innovation and fair labor opportunities, coupled with reforms in immigration and assistance programs. He warns of potential social and financial crises if systemic problems are not addressed, advocating for national unity and bold, disruptive leadership to revitalize the economy.